Thomas Jones was enjoying his second cup of coffee that morning when the door to the work cabin was suddenly flung open and a fat, florid man by the name of Pendleton marched into the room. "What in all the blue blazes is going on here?" he said, casting a baleful eye at Thomas and the rest of his crew. "We're nearly a week over schedule. You bunch of happy assholes are sitting on your butts drinking coffee." "Now wait a damn minute," Thomas said, climbing to his feet. Thomas was a big man and loomed over Pendleton. Still, he felt small at the look of the righteous anger on the other man's face. "Maybe we could talk about this outside," he said, glancing around the room. It was obvious the other man was going to tear a strip out of him, but he'd rather not have it done in front of his crew. Pendleton smirked. "Sure, let's talk," he said, turning his back on him and strutting arrogantly from the room. "Asshole," someone muttered under their breath, but Thomas ignored them and followed after the other man, closing the door gently behind him. As soon as the door swung shut, he turned on him. "You want to tell me what the hell's going on here, Jones? This demolition job was supposed to be finished last week. Then I got a call from head office telling me to get my ass down to Cornwall. No explanation, just that things had come to a screeching halt with the job barely even started." Thomas took umbrage at that. Who the hell did this guy think he was, anyway, with his ill-fitting suit and superior attitude, coming down here and embarrassing Thomas in front of his crew? "Does it look like it's hardly begun?" he growled to the other man, widening his arms as if to encompass the entire street with its now empty plots. "We've been busy busting our asses to hit your outrageous deadline, and everything was going according to plan until we came to that monstrosity," he said, pointing to the end of the street, at the old manor house that stood grimly overlooking the sea. Pendleton followed his gaze. "I don't see a problem," he smirked. "That place looks like a harsh wind could blow it down." Thomas sighed and rubbed his head, beginning to feel the first pulses of a migraine. "Look, it's hard to explain, so I'll just have to show you, okay?" Pendleton shrugged, uncertain now and not sure what the other man was getting at. Thomas took his silence for consent and walked a little ways down the street before jumping into a nearby dumpster and firing up the engine in a cloud of black diesel-smelling fumes. "Watch this!" Thomas yelled over the roar of the engines, driving slowly towards the old waiting mansion. Pendleton followed on foot, careful not to get any of the black smoke on his shiny suit. When Thomas came to the mansion, he did a skillful turn, so he was now facing the grounds. The hanging gates thrown open as if in some kind of dreadful welcome. "You ready?" he said, looking down at the other man. "What is this, show and tell?" Pendleton yelled back at him. "Just get the hell on with it, Jones. Time is money." Thomas nodded and drove slowly forward. As soon as the front tires hit the property boundary line, the dumpster's engine suddenly cut out. Thomas knew it was no good, turned the key, cranked the engine, but nothing. The big yellow dumpster ignition had just cranked over, but never catching until at last he gave up, throwing up his hands in frustration. "You see what I mean now?" he said, glaring down at Pendleton. "You just flooded the goddamn engine is all. Get down from there, let me try it. I was driving these things when you were still playing with your Tonka trucks." "Be my guest," Thomas said, jumping down and smirking as the fat man struggled to climb into the torn leather seat. "Okay, baby," Pendleton muttered. "Give it up for Daddy." He slowly pumped the gas before turning the key, but no matter how he cursed and cudgeled, the engine simply wouldn't catch. "Now put the gear shift into reverse," Thomas called up to him. "Try her again." "You lost your fucking mind," Pendleton snapped. "The engine's dead. Faulty equipment, that's all." "Humor me," Thomas smiled up at him. Muttering, the other man did as he was bid, grinding the gears into reverse before turning the key. Immediately, the engine roared into life, and Pendleton let out a cry as he was flung backwards before slamming on the brakes. "What the hell?" Pendleton cursed angrily, slamming the gear forward. The big machine approached the house again in angry jerks, but as soon as the front wheels hit the threshold, the engine immediately cut out. Furious now, he grabbed for the gear stick again, but Thomas jumped aboard and covered the other man's hand with his own. It won't work, Pendleton, no matter how hard you try. Pendleton angrily shook free. Go get that JCB from across the street, he pointed. But Thomas shook his head wearily. We've already tried. We've tried with every machine we have. The result is always the same. Bullshit, Pendleton snapped. You're playing some kind of prank or silly game up here. You shitting me? Thomas snapped back, his own anger growing. You think I would risk the jobs of my men, hell, even my own job, by playing some stupid prank on a suit from corporate? You watch your tone with me, Jones, the fat man said, pushing him aside and laboriously climbing back down onto the street. Thomas followed, landing nimbly beside him. Fine, I won't waste my time trying to convince you then. The keys to everything we have are hanging up in the cabin. You go to town and report back when you're finished, Thomas said, strolling angrily away. This time it was Pendleton's time to follow. You're serious, aren't you? He said, laying a sweaty hand on Thomas's shoulder and gently turning him back around to face him. I ain't fucking with you, if that's what you're saying. No, nothing. I mean, nothing works. I have had every machine we have examined, checked for faults. They all run fine until we try to... Well, you know, he said, looking towards the slumped house solemnly. How could that be? Pendleton replied, some of the anger fading as he followed the other man's gaze. Some say the old place is haunted, Thomas chuckled nervously. But Pendleton waved that away. Yeah, we all heard those old wives' tales about Lucas Vandraven and the missing people, blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. And how do you account for all this? Thomas said, his headache worsening. I don't know, Pendleton said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Some kind of magnetic pulse, or maybe ley lines, or some kind of other crap, but I don't know. I do know one thing. Certainly ain't ghosts. In fact, he said, slowly walking away, I'm gonna go take a look inside, see if I can't figure this thing out. You coming? You are the foreman, after all. Thomas didn't really want to go. If he was being honest, he didn't like that old house. It had a feeling about it, like something was trying to weasel its way into your mind, stand in its shadow. It was akin to being buried alive. Still, he heard the challenge in the other man's voice. He didn't believe in ghosts and ghouls and wasn't about to let this corporate asshole show him up. Fine. Let's go take a look if that's what you really want. Together, the two men headed back down the street, their shadows growing long behind them. The Vandraven house stood as it had for almost 200 years, overlooking the dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It was a lonely place, abandoned and spurned by the locals of the village and surrounding areas who had grown up listening to the ghastly tales of Lucas Vandraven, who had murdered his wife and servants. But dark rituals and things left best unspoken, found in the spider-infested bowels of that old house. Not to mention the people from outside who had tried to renovate the old place. Many had gone missing or turned up dead. Madness, murder, and suicide had soaked into the very fabric of the Vandraven house, its dark legacy haunting the area with an unimaginable dread. So, what do you think? Thomas said, as they stood on the threshold. Looks like a real shithole, Pendleton replied, taking in the overgrown gardens and peeling paint. Those lions, he said, heading towards the entrance of the house before squatting down and tearing away the crawling ivy from the two statues. That some kind of coat of arms? Thomas asked, almost going to his haunches, interested now despite his initial fear. Looks like it, Pendleton replied, running his blunt fingers over the engraving, which was faint but still clearly showing a clipper ship riding atop a huge wave, some kind of bird soaring overhead, a struggling fish caught up in its great talons. Chiseled underneath, in stark relief, was one word. Vandraven. Charming, Pendleton muttered, standing and wiping the mud and leaves from his trouser leg. All right, let's take a look inside. I already tried that. The old place is locked. Unless you want to crawl through that, he said, pointing to one of the many shattered windows where jagged glass shined wickedly in the fading light. No need, Pendleton replied loftily. I just so happen to have the key, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a large bunch of keys attached to a metal ring. How the hell did you get those? When one buys a property, or in this case a whole street, one gets everything that comes with it, including the keys, not that they come cheap. The parish council asked an absurd amount for a place already half abandoned and falling into disrepair. The entire street was almost completely empty, and those who remained were easily bought off. Apparently they weren't fond of living too close to this old relic, he said, slapping one of the faded pillars. Thomas winced at that. Pendleton laughed at the look on his face. Don't worry, Jones, it won't bite you, he said, slapping one meaty hand against the old house again, but suddenly he hissed in pain, the palm of his hand bleeding. God damn it, he said, picking a piece of masonry from his hand. Fucking place should have been condemned years ago. Here, Thomas said, handing him a grease-stained bandana from his coverall pocket. Thanks, the other man replied, looking for a clean spot before quickly wrapping up the still bleeding wound. Look, maybe you should go clean that up. We can always come back tomorrow, and didn't I tell you, time is money, Jones, he said, selecting a large black pitted key and ramming it home into the lock. Now, let's go take a look before it gets too dark. I doubt very much the electricity's still on in this place. Fine. Lead the way. Not sure what you're hoping to find, but it's your party. Pendleton ignored that, and together, the two men stepped inside. The Vandraven house had once been a magnificent mansion built for his new bride. Lucas Vandraven had spared no expense. The once varnished floorboards had gleamed underfoot, illuminated by crystal chandeliers imported from Paris, France. The sturdy walls had been covered in fine, velvet-like wallpaper, and the house had been filled with all manner of antiques and wonders from Lucas's many travels abroad. But that had been many years ago. Now those same floorboards were warped and covered in grit and dust from the crumbling walls. The once massive chandelier that warmly illuminated the main entrance lay dark and broken, the many cracked crystals hanging like the fallen tears of those who had succumbed to the madness within. Jesus, Pendleton said, wrinkling his nose. The damn place stinks. The hell is that smell? Mold, damp, decay, Thomas replied. We're probably taking years off our lives by breathing the damn place in. Still, he wasn't convinced. There was another smell that seemed to lay just beneath. A dark, rotting smell that seemed to stick to the inside of your nose and slime the back of your throat. I can see why the locals think this place is haunted, Pendleton said, scraping his shiny shoe tip through the broken plaster and small pieces of splintered wood. Look there, Thomas said, heading through a nearby hanging door into what looked like it must have been a study or a small library. Look at this. Damn thing must be over 100 years old, maybe more, he said, running his hand over the desk's varnished sides. Probably older, Pendleton said. Surprised it hasn't been removed. Not in bad condition. Well, not compared to the rest of the house. You think it belonged to him? This, Lucas Vandraven fella? Pendleton shrugged. Who cares? Come on, let's take a look around. Suddenly, there was a crash from upstairs, and a door slammed somewhere in the back of the house. Both men stared at each other. The air around them suddenly plummeted, becoming frigid, and Thomas was sure he could see Pendleton's breath just before the other man bolted, heading straight for the front door, Thomas hot on his heels. For a moment, Thomas was sure they would find the door shut and locked tight against them, but it was just as they left it, and both men bolted through, not stopping or slowing down until they reached the other side of the street. Both doubled over, breathing heavily. Oh, holy shit, what was that? Thomas gasped. Probably just the wind, Pendleton said. Either way, it scared the living hell out of me. You and me both, Thomas chuckled, feeling like a fool. Okay. Pendleton straightened. I don't give a shit That place is haunted or not, it's coming down one way or another. I'm heading back to Manchester now tonight. I'll send you a crane with a wrecking ball attached. The damn thing won't even have a chance to get close to the property. We just extend the crane arms, swing away, and down that happy asshole comes. With the paperwork and everything. Should be with you in a few days at the most. All right, Thomas agreed. Sounds like a plan. Sure, the boys would like a few days off to go check out the local girls. Sleeping in a metal cabin on a cot bed and working around the clock has made them a bit testy. A few drinks and a lark will do some good. Pendleton waved that away. Whatever, Jones. Just make sure the equipment arrives and you and your boys are ready to go. I want this shit taken care of ASAP. Remember, time is money, Thomas cut in. Yeah, I got it. Then there should be no problems then, should there? Pendleton called over his shoulder as he walked away. Thomas said nothing. His eyes had returned to the Vandraven house as he realized once again he had been swallowed by its shadow. Thomas had left the rest of his crew to their debauchery and walked through the night-shrouded village. It was winter in Mavagesi, and the summer people had once again left the denizens of the village to their own devices. Turning his collar against the cold and damp, he noticed a flickering through a nearby pub window and smiled, peering through the window at the roaring fire inside. His frigid breath pluming against the glass, the place looked quiet and cozy. He looked up at the creaking sign that gently blew in the night breeze. The sign read, "The Lantern." "Okay," he said. "Just one more for the road, then off to bed." That said, he stepped inside, happy for the warmth and the fire's comforting glow, before sauntering over to the bar and ordering a pint and a whiskey chaser. Taking his drinks, he sat by the fire, wishing for the good old days when you could still smoke inside instead of having to freeze your butt off in the middle of the street like some fucking pariah. He had just taken the foam off his drink when a small, pudgy man with round John Lennon glasses appeared out of nowhere. He had a drink in one hand and what looked like a file stuffed with papers tucked firmly under the other. Funny enough, the owlish-looking man seemed somewhat familiar to Thomas, but couldn't quite place him. When the man didn't speak, Thomas sighed, frustrated by the interruption. "Can I help you with something?" he said, trying to hide the annoyance from his voice. "As a matter of fact, you can," the man smiled, taking Thomas's words as an invitation to sit. "You're working up on Beach Road, I believe, clearing out those old houses up there." When Thomas didn't reply, he carried on excitedly. "Yes, you've torn them all down, but not the Vandraven house," he said, his voice dropping to a conspirator's whisper. "Seems like you're having some problems with that machinery of yours." Suddenly, Thomas could place the man. "You've been hanging around by the coastal path, haven't you, up by that old house?" The other man shrugged. "The public footpath. I'm not trespassing," he added quickly. "That's right, you ain't trespassing," Thomas repeated. "But spying on our progress, perhaps?" The other man laughed. "More like taking a vested interest. Look," he said, suddenly growing somber. "My name's Harry Unsworth, from the University of Falmouth. Let me buy you another drink. We can talk. Hell, I may even be able to help you figure out what's going on up there. I have become something of an expert on the Vandraven house over the years. Maybe give you a little history on the old place. It's cold outside. We have a nice roaring fire, one hell of a night for a ghost story. And no man likes to drink alone." Thomas smiled at this, interested now in spite of himself. Besides, the man had a certain open charm, and a free drink was a free drink after all. "Okay," he said, smiling. "Mine's a whiskey. A double, actually." A few moments later, Harry returned with the drinks, took off his jacket, and seated himself more comfortably across from Thomas, his coffee-stained file between them. "This," he said, tapping the file, "is years of research and history on the incidents and happenings that have taken place inside that house. The last case being less than 5 years ago. And a bunch of bloggers went up there and tried to stay the night. They had a YouTube channel, all ghost seekers. 2 of them were found dead inside. The other one burned up on the front lawn. Now, the local police called it a murder-suicide, slammed the case closed, just like they do every time the Vandraven house takes another victim. Thomas took a long drink, then nervously wiped at his mouth. Talk like the damn place is alive or something. Unsworth shrugged. Maybe it is. What is it you said you do again at the university of yours? Thomas said, not liking the other man's reply. Unsworth laughed. I'm a history teacher. You could say parapsychology is a sideline of mine. No, I'm not crazy. That house has a checkered past. Here, he said, not waiting for a reply, but opening his file. The house was first built by Lucas Vandraven in 1836, on the hilltop overlooking the village. There was some controversy over the location, as a certain set of stone rings, going all the way back into antiquity, had been uprooted and the stone used in the very foundation of the house. Then there were the two men killed whilst the house was under construction. One fell from scaffolding, another crushed by falling masonry. Lucas paid off the grieving widows, moved right in with his wife Elizabeth, her maid Matilda, and Lucas's manservant Stevens. By November of the next year, all were found dead, except Lucas, who threw himself from the cliffside. Rumor has it, he was found with some abomination that still clung to him, even in death. There was also talk of dark rituals, obscene rites that were held to some infernal god in the dark bowels of that place. Jesus, Thomas replied, taking a long, hard pull from his pint and wishing desperately for a cigarette. That's only the tip of the iceberg, Unsworth continued eagerly. The house lay abandoned for nearly 70 years until a retired shipbuilder from Manchester moved in with his dreams of renovations. He was found sometime later, hanging from the rafters of what had once been Lucas Vandraven's study. Now it was the turn of the Jonas family, who went missing, their belongings still inside, but the family itself gone, just like that. He snapped his fingers for emphasis. 30 years later, the Dorchesters found in the basement, their bodies found torn, twisted, as if by some terrible force. And for a time, the house lay empty, holding its dark secrets until 2010, when the Maloneys moved in. A husband and wife, 2 little girls. A father was found in the basement, his family chopped to little pieces, scattered around him. The local constable that went to investigate was later found hanging from the ceiling beams in an upstairs bedroom. Then there was the 2 town drunks who tried to break into Lucas Vandraven's tomb, perhaps looking for treasure. One was never seen again, the other, a raving lunatic. I could go on. Please don't, Thomas said, holding up a restraining hand, which seemed to tremble ever so slightly. I get the point. I could see why many believe the place is cursed or haunted, but I'm a practical kind of guy, and I just don't believe in ghosts and ghoulies. What? The other man asked incredulously. How do you explain all the mysterious deaths and your machines? The hell do you think's going on in there? Thomas shrugged, growing tired of the whole thing. I have no idea. But I doubt very much the ghost of Lucas Vandraven is fucking with me and my fuel lines. Unsworth didn't reply, but finished up his drink before leaning against the table towards the other man. In a way, it's good you don't believe. I have to admit, I didn't run into you tonight by chance. I have, shall we say, a proposition for you. Sorry? Thomas smirked. But, you're not my type. Unsworth ignored that. I want to go into that house. I have certain equipment with me. I want to go inside only briefly, you understand? Just to take a few readings and perhaps do a little recording. Thomas's eyes narrowed. So, that's it. You want me to get you inside, and why would you want to go in there? You so obviously believe the place is cursed or haunted or whatever the hell it is. You believe. So why? Why would you want to go in there? Because, Unsworth replied, just happy that Thomas hadn't walked out on him yet. Because if I can prove it, if I can get a good reading or catch something on camera, I can finally get the university to take me seriously. Maybe even give me funding to study the paranormal right there, on campus. Well, I hate to rain on your parade, Thomas said, starting to stand. "But I ain't gonna be helping you break into that old house. It's more than my job is worth." £1,000, cash, Hemsworth said, slapping a stuffed envelope onto the table between them. £1,000 right now, just for 10 minutes, to just take a walk around and take a couple of readings. Thomas slowly sat back down. "You're crazy," he said, eyeing the stuffed envelope. "Look," Unsworth said, "your crew are all down here pissing it up, chasing the village girls, and locals don't go anywhere near the place. Nobody will see us, and you're up $1,000, tax-free, for 10 minutes of your time." Seeing Thomas needed a little more convincing, he reached into his pocket again and slapped another stuffed envelope on the table. "It's another 1,000. Don't ask for more. I'm tapped out." "Jesus, you're crazy," Thomas said. Still, he reached across the table and stuffed both envelopes quickly into his jacket pocket. 10 minutes, he said as both men climbed to their feet. "You have 10 minutes, and you're done." Sure, Unsworth said, scrambling into his jacket. "And don't worry. What could possibly go wrong?" It had taken Unsworth 10 minutes to nip back into his B&B and gather up his equipment. After that, both men had headed up the hill, neither talking much. Thomas smoking one cigarette after another. He knew he was doing a stupid thing, but $2,000 was $2,000, and the chances of being caught inside was little to none. Still, he didn't cherish the thought of going back into that old place, especially after the horror story he had been subjected to. Even if you didn't believe in all that supernatural crap, it was enough to give you the goddamn heebie-jeebies. However, it wasn't every day you got to earn $2,000 for 10 minutes. He was dragged out of his own pondering by an excited squeal from Unsworth, and looked up surprised to see that they had already arrived. Okay, Unsworth said, quickly crossing the road and unzipping his jacket, revealing an expensive-looking camera that hung around his neck. "Just a quick snap from the outside, and we can head on in." Thomas looked nervously about as the camera's flash cut through the surrounding darkness. "Hurry the hell up, will ya?" he hissed. Okay, let's go," Unsworth said, trotting back against the street, his camera banging hollowly against his chest. "The hell am I doing?" Thomas muttered under his breath as he led the way, pushing past the rust-covered gates into the Vandraven grounds, the smaller man hot on his heels. Suddenly, he was blinded by another flash as Unsworth snapped another photo of the crumbling lions that proudly held the coat of arms of Vandraven. "Cut that shit out!" he angrily rounded on the other man. "You take one more fucking picture before we can get inside, and the whole goddamn thing is off." Sure thing," Unsworth said, quickly stuffing his camera away. Still, he buzzed with an excited energy that set Thomas's teeth on edge. "Okay," Thomas said. "We're going in through the back door. The thing is all rotted out. It should only take a quick shove and we're in. After that, you got 10 minutes, not a second longer." "Understood," the other man nodded eagerly. "Let's go." The back of the Vandraven house was much like the front, overgrown with clingy ivy. The once marble flagstaffs covered with centuries of fallen leaves. The wind whistled through the rotting eaves, and long-dead trees creaked and groaned in the stark winter winds, as if horrified to be trapped in such a hellish landscape. From behind them came a sudden loud boom, and both men spun around, their hearts beating hard in their chests, but it was only the lid of an old coal bin banging up and down in the growing wind. "Jesus," Unsworth laughed nervously. "This place is one crazy creep show." "You could say that again," Thomas replied, his wet tongue sliding over his dry lips. "You sure you want to go in there?" "Yes," Unsworth replied. "You're goddamn right I do. I've been waiting for something like this all my life. I wouldn't be stopped now just because of a stiff breeze." The little man's courage bolstered some of Thomas's own. "All right then, let's get it done," he said, approaching the sagging back door and laying his shoulder against it gently, before pushing hard with his legs. Immediately, the rotting door gave way. Thomas let out a cry of alarm. Unsworth's quick reaction stopped him from taking a nasty fall as the other man grabbed a handful of his jacket. "Thanks," Thomas said. "That was easier than expected. I guess the house wants us to come in." The comment was supposed to be a throwaway remark. Yet it hung heavily between the two men until Unsworth took a flashlight from the inside of his jacket and gently pushed past, illuminating the interior within. They were standing in a large kitchen, or what was left of one at least. In the middle of the room sat a large wooden chopping block, splintered and gouged. Attached to a nearby wall was a large rusting sink, from which fat droplets of filth-colored water dripped onto its chipped, sagging surface. Broken tiles crunched beneath their feet, and shelves with old, bulging, rusty tins cast deranged shadows across the peeling walls. Thomas swallowed hard and glanced at his watch. 10 minutes. 10 minutes and we're out of here. Unsworth didn't answer but moved more fully into the room, snapping the occasional picture, his flashlight illuminating the decay in stark relief. When he was done, he pushed through the sagging door and into a long hallway. Thomas stayed close behind him. "It's cold," Unsworth muttered. "You feel that?" He sat over his shoulder. "Yeah," Thomas replied. "What do you expect? It's the middle of winter." Unsworth didn't reply, but took a thermometer from the small bag he was carrying and quickly recorded the temperature. "We need to go that way," he said, pointing to the end of the hall. "That's Lucas Vandraven's study. If anything's going to happen, it will be in there." "I doubt it," Thomas sighed. Still, he was eager to leave the place. There was something in the air, a kind of watchfulness. He quickly glanced at his watch. 8 minutes. Unsworth turned and continued down the hall, his flashlight cutting through the waiting darkness until at last they reached the study room. With its ornate desk and rotting books that perfumed the air with the smell of rot and mildew, Unsworth stepped inside. Thomas was about to follow when a sudden hiss came from behind. With a cry, he swung around, flashlight trembling. Just then, the door between the men slammed shut. From the other side came a cry of alarm as Unsworth pounded on the door, frantically trying to get out. Thomas stood there frozen as a naked woman stepped out of the darkness. 2 knitting needles sticking obscenely from her throat, blood oozing down her body. In her outstretched arms, she carried some kind of obscene creature that mewled and thrashed as if in terrible pain, its own rancid blood running down her arms. Through bloody teeth, she grinned at him. "Oh, Lucas," she crooned. "Oh, Lucas, what have you done? What have you done to our son?" With an angry hiss, she flung the abomination at him, and with a cry, he threw up his arms, staggering backwards, landing heavily against the front door with a screech of fear. He tried to beat the creature away, but there was nothing there. The woman had completely vanished, and the house was deathly silent. Quickly, he scrambled to his feet. Remembering Unsworth, he grabbed for the study door, which opened easily to his touch. What he saw there almost broke his mind, and he took a step away, whimpering. Unsworth lay across the large ornate desk. 2 old-fashioned quill pens had been driven into his eyes, and his throat was a bloody ruin. From beside his body, a little girl's face suddenly appeared. She grinned at him slyly from her bloody mouth. "Hey, mister," she giggled. "You seen my sissy? She's around here someplace." A cold hand suddenly fell against his shoulder, and with a scream he turned and looked into the rotting face of Lucas Vandraven. In his terror, he forgot the little girl and staggered back into the room. "You should not have come," Lucas groaned, maggots squirming in his hair. "This place is damned. We are damned. We're trapped here. This place feeds upon our souls. It'll feed upon you, too. You will spend an eternity of torment trapped in this place." "No!" Lucas cried, swinging his arms at the rotting corpse, but his hand passed through the thin air, and he ran, heading for the front door, but of course, finding it locked. "This way, lover," a voice called from down the hall. A pale, bloody arm broke through the darkness, beckoning to him. The nails cracked and bloody. With a cry, he headed up the old winding staircase, desperate to escape the madness below. His mind started to fracture as the house came alive all around him. He could hear screams and gibbering. Faces appeared out of the darkness, their faces infused with torment and terror. With a cry, he flung himself into the first room he came to and slammed the door closed behind him. Inside, there was nothing but an old, rusting cot and a large, ornate wardrobe that now creaked open. "It won't do any good to run away," a child's voice seeped from within. "I hid right here. Right here, and Daddy found me. Always." The door slowly creaked open, and a dead boy staggered out. His eyes rolled white, his skin slate gray. A large carving knife jutted from his chest. His bloody Thomas the Tank Engine pajamas clung to his wasted body as he slouched his way towards Thomas. "You should stay a while," he giggled. "It's so beautifully dark here." The door he had escaped through was shaking now, and he could hear screams of anguish as dark, rotting blood seeped towards him. With a scream of madness, he flung himself against the room and hit the boarded-up window, which instantly gave under his weight, and blessingly, he was falling. Splinters of wood and shards of glass all about him. As he turned and twisted in midair, he didn't see the rusting fence spikes that burst through his back and chest, impaling him like a bug on a needle. The last thing Thomas Jones saw, as the light faded from his eyes, it was a multitude of faces. The windows of the house were filled with them, their hungry, grasping hands beckoning him to join them. Inside the Vandraven house, time did not stand still. It twisted and undulated. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallways. A scream of despair, followed by breaking glass, drifted from the kitchen. Somewhere in the bowels of the house, a child cried out in fear, and a woman's moans and sighs drifted down the peeling halls. In the parlor, a grandfather clock chimed softly, as it had done for many years, and would continue to do so for many more. And for now, the evil inside slept, and the house waited, and waited, and waited. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening to tonight's podcast if you're listening on Spotify, and thank you guys for doing that thing where you subscribe, where you hit the bell, where you hit like, or you leave a little comment at the bottom or wherever you can leave comments at. I don't know, I don't use Spotify that much. And finally, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. This past year has been rough. I've been gone for quite a while trying to get things organized for my own life, and Patreon subscribers, you guys who subscribe everywhere, this has kept me afloat in turbulent waters. So I want to give a very special thank you to Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, Disciple, Strategy Wolf Emoji, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna, LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Jennah, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, Mephistopheles, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jesus Cornejo, Yarghoul, VerbalHorror, Amber Clark, J. Kearns, Mike, himbojerry, CrusaderChocobo, Gordon Dallas, Estebean, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Cryolinian, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Dirt Diver 030, Voice of Sand, Psychomel, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Sashi Suzaku, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. I really appreciate your support, and I cannot thank you enough.